The massive hall buzzed with nervous energy as cadets from 12 different species gathered around Commander Vextar. The towering reptilian officer stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lights of Kepler Station Military Academy. His yellow eyes swept across the mixed crowd of alien faces, each species representing the finest warriors their worlds could produce. Today marks the 50th anniversary of the Arctic hunting simulation, Vextar announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through countless battles. 50 years of attempts, 50 years of failure, 50 years of death. A collective shiver ran through the assembled cadets. Everyone knew about the simulation. It was legendary throughout the academy, spoken about in hushed whispers in the dormitories. The Arctic hunting simulation had claimed every single participant who dared to enter its frozen hell. Jake Morrison stood near the back of the crowd, his plain human features unremarkable among the exotic alien faces surrounding him. At 22 years old, he looked younger than most of the other cadets. His brown hair was cropped short in military fashion, and his blue eyes held a quiet intensity that few bothered to notice. Among beings with natural armor, energy manipulation abilities, and enhanced physical capabilities, Jake appeared thoroughly ordinary. The simulation recreates the conditions of Cryos Prime, Vextar continued, his clawed hands gesturing toward a holographic display that materialized above the crowd. The image showed a world of endless white, where storms raged with supernatural fury. Temperatures reach minus 80 degrees Celsius. Winds exceed 200 kilometers per hour. Visibility drops to 0 during storm cycles that can last for days. The hologram shifted, showing the cybernetic predators that stalked the simulation's frozen wasteland. Mechanical wolves with glowing red eyes, their metal fangs designed to tear through the strongest armor. Adaptive hunters that learned from every encounter, growing deadlier with each engagement. Participants must survive for 10 standard days while being actively hunted, Vextar explained. The predators are programmed with advanced learning algorithms. They study your behavior, adapt to your tactics, and exploit your weaknesses. The simulation ends only when you die or when the timer reaches 0. A Volteran cadet raised his crystalline arm. His species could regulate their body temperature through their natural crystal scales, making them seemingly ideal for Arctic conditions. Commander, has any species come close to completing the simulation? Vextar's expression darkened. The longest survival time belongs to a Kethmari warrior who lasted 37 hours. Her natural armor protected her from the cold longer than most, but even she fell to the adaptive predators. He paused, letting the weight of that failure sink in. The shortest survival time was 12 minutes, achieved by a Sauron like myself. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but it carried no real humor. Everyone understood the implications. If a Sauron warrior, bred for combat and survival, could only last 12 minutes, what hope did anyone else have? The simulation remains available for volunteers, Vextar announced. Despite its perfect fatality rate, the Academy maintains it as the ultimate test of survival skills. Any cadet who believes they possess the capability to succeed may register their intent. Silence stretched across the hall. Jake watched as cadets glanced at each other, each waiting for someone else to step forward. The Volterans whispered among themselves about their temperature regulation abilities. The energy-based Luminos discussed their phasing capabilities. The insectoid Kethmari examined their natural armor with new appreciation. Jake took a step forward. The movement was small, barely noticeable at first, but as he continued walking toward the front of the hall, conversations died away. Alien eyes turned to follow his progress, and a murmur of disbelief began to build. "Commander," Jake said when he reached the front of the crowd. His voice was steady, showing none of the fear that should have accompanied such a decision. "I volunteer for the Arctic hunting simulation." Vextar stared down at the human cadet, his reptilian features showing genuine surprise. "Cadet Morrison, I must inform you that humans possess no natural advantages for this environment. Your species lacks temperature regulation capabilities, natural armor, enhanced healing factors, or energy manipulation abilities." "I understand, sir," Jake replied simply. "You have no thick hide to protect against the cold," Vextar continued, as if Jake might not fully comprehend the implications. "No ability to phase through solid matter to escape predators. No psychic powers to anticipate attacks. Nothing that would give you an edge over the dozens of more naturally gifted beings who have already died in this simulation." Jake nodded. "Yes, sir, I still volunteer." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Alex Carter, Jake's best friend and fellow human cadet, pushed through the crowd toward the front. His face showed the panic that Jake's calm demeanor seemed to lack. "Jake, what are you doing?" Alex grabbed his friend's arm. "This is suicide. You heard what the commander said. Nobody survives this thing. Nobody." Lisa Hayes, the human medic, who had become close friends with both young men, appeared beside Alex. Her medical training made her acutely aware of human limitations in extreme environments. "Jake, your body can't handle those temperatures. Humans aren't built for that kind of cold. You'll freeze to death in the first hour." Jake looked at his friends, seeing the genuine concern in their faces. These were the people who had stood by him through every challenge at the academy. They had watched him struggle with advanced technology while alien cadets mastered it effortlessly. They had seen him work twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up with beings who possessed natural advantages that humans could never match. "I know what you're thinking," Jake said quietly, speaking only to Alex and Lisa. "But this isn't about proving anything to them. This is about proving something to myself." "Proving what?" Lisa demanded. "That humans can die just as easily as any other species? We already know that." Jake shook his head. "Proving that maybe being ordinary isn't the same as being helpless." Commander Vextar cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the official. "Proceedings. Cadet Morrison, are you certain of your decision? Once you enter the simulation pod, the challenge cannot be stopped until completion or death. The safety protocols are minimal to maintain the simulation's authenticity." "I'm certain, sir." Vextar produced a digital pad containing the waiver that every volunteer was required to sign. The document outlined the risks in stark detail, absolving the Academy of responsibility for the participants' inevitable death. Jake read through the terms carefully, his finger hovering over the signature field. Around the hall, alien cadets began placing bets on how long the human would survive. The Voltaran, who had asked about previous survival times, started an impromptu wagering pool. Most bets clustered around the 15 to 30-minute range. A few optimistic souls wagered on Jake lasting up to an hour. Nobody bet on him surviving past the first day. Jake pressed his finger to the signature field, officially entering himself into the simulation that had killed every previous participant. The crowd fell silent again, a mixture of morbid curiosity and disbelief replacing the earlier excitement. "Report to Simulation Bay 7 in 1 hour," Vextar instructed. "Use that time to prepare yourself mentally and physically. The simulation will begin immediately upon pod activation. As Jake walked away from the crowd, Alex and Lisa fell into step beside him. Neither spoke, but their presence provided a comfort that Jake appreciated more than he could express. They understood that arguing would be pointless now. The decision was made. The waiver signed. In his quarters, Jake sat on his narrow bunk and thought about his grandfather. The old man had been a Navy SEAL who trained in Alaska during Earth's coldest winters. He had taught Jake things that seemed primitive compared to the advanced technology surrounding them at the academy. How to read wind patterns, how to find shelter in hostile terrain, how to think like a predator when you were being hunted. At the time, those lessons had seemed like interesting stories from a simpler era. Now they might be the only thing standing between Jake Morrison and becoming the 51st fatality of the Arctic hunting simulation. The simulation pod sealed around Jake with a soft hiss of pressurizing air. Through the observation windows, he could see dozens of alien faces pressed against the glass, waiting to witness another death. Commander Vextar stood at the main control panel, his clawed fingers dancing across holographic displays as the Arctic hunting simulation loaded its deadly parameters. "Simulation beginning in 10 seconds, announced the computer's neutral voice. "Environmental conditions set to maximum. Difficulty. Predator AI adaptive learning enabled. Emergency extraction protocols minimized per participant request." Jake closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he was standing in hell. The wind hit him like a physical blow, driving snow and ice into his face with enough force to blind him instantly. The cold was beyond anything he had ever experienced, cutting through his standard-issue survival gear as if it were made of paper. His breath formed ice crystals that shattered in the howling gale before they could fall to the ground. Through the observation deck, alien spectators leaned forward with morbid fascination. The betting pool had been closed at 37 minutes, matching the previous survival record. Most wagers clustered around 15 minutes for the human's death. Jake did something that made every observer pause in confusion. Instead of immediately seeking shelter or trying to orient himself in the blizzard, he removed his outer jacket. "What is he doing?" whispered a Volteran cadet, his crystalline features reflecting the pale light from the observation deck. "He's removing protection in sub-zero temperatures." Lisa Hayes pressed closer to the observation window, her medical training screaming warnings about hypothermia and frostbite. "Jake, what are you thinking?" she muttered, knowing he couldn't hear her. For several long minutes, Jake stood motionless, in the storm, wearing only his base layer thermal clothing. Snow accumulated on his shoulders and head, while he simply felt the wind patterns against his exposed skin. His body shivered violently, but his face remained calm and focused. The alien observers watched in bewilderment as Jake slowly turned in a complete circle, his eyes closed despite the driving snow. He was reading the environment like his grandfather had taught him during those long winters in Alaska. Feel the wind direction. Understand how it moves around obstacles. Learn the rhythm of the storm. After what seemed like an eternity, Jake put his jacket back on and began moving with purpose. Through the white hell, unlike previous participants who had rushed frantically to find shelter, Jake walked with deliberate steps, following wind patterns that only he seemed to understand. Commander Vextar studied the tracking displays with growing confusion. "His movement pattern makes no tactical sense," he muttered to his aide. "He's moving deeper into the storm zone instead of seeking natural windbreaks." But Jake knew exactly what he was doing. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, teaching. Lessons learned through decades of survival in Earth's harshest environments. Don't fight the storm, learn from it. Don't fear the cold, understand it. Don't run from danger. Make it work for you. The first day passed without incident. Jake found a natural depression in the ice where wind patterns created a pocket of relatively calm air. He dug himself a shelter that would be invisible to thermal sensors, using techniques that seemed primitive but were devastatingly effective. The monitoring station buzzed with activity as technicians checked and rechecked their readings. No participant had ever lasted through the first night without at least one encounter with the cybernetic predators. Jake Morrison was rewriting the rules simply by surviving. On the second day, the predators found him. 3 mechanical wolves materialized out of the storm like nightmares given form. Each stood as tall as a small horse, their metal frames bristling, with sensors and adaptive learning processors. Their glowing red eyes cut through the swirling snow as they triangulated Jake's position with military precision. The observation deck fell silent as every spectator leaned forward to watch the humans. Inevitable death. Cybernetic wolves were the simulation's primary predators, designed to adapt to their prey's behavior and exploit weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. Jake saw them coming long before their sensors detected him. His grandfather had taught him to think like both predator and prey, to understand the hunt from both perspectives. These machines might be programmed with advanced algorithms, but they still followed predictable patterns. What happened next defied every tactical manual ever, written at the Academy. Instead of running away from the wolves or taking a defensive position, Jake charged directly toward the heart of the storm. He sprinted through the blizzard with the mechanical predators in pursuit, using the howling wind and driving snow as natural camouflage. "Impossible!" breathed a Kethmari instructor, her insectoid features showing complete bewilderment. "No, prey species runs toward greater danger when being hunted." But Jake wasn't thinking like prey. He was thinking like his grandfather, who had once told him that the most dangerous place to hide was often the most obvious place to look. The storm was everyone's enemy, which made it the perfect ally for someone desperate enough to use it. Thou. Cybernetic wolves followed Jake into the white hell, their advanced sensors struggling to maintain target locks through the electromagnetic interference generated by the storm. Their adaptive programming had been designed to counter logical escape attempts, not the seemingly suicidal tactic of diving deeper into lethal environmental conditions. Jake led them on a chase that lasted hours, using his knowledge of wind patterns and terrain features to stay just ahead of their pursuit. When the first wolf finally closed within striking distance, Jake did something that broke the machine's programming entirely. He stopped running and turned to face his pursuer. The wolf's algorithms had been programmed to expect continued flight or a desperate defensive stand. Instead, Jake grabbed a jagged piece of ice and drove it into the machine's optical sensors with the precision of someone who had studied its approach patterns for hours. Blinded and confused, the cybernetic predator stumbled in the snow while Jake used its momentary disorientation to access its maintenance panel. His fingers, numb with cold but still functional, found the primary power coupling and yanked it free. The first wolf died in a shower of sparks and steam, its advanced systems failing in the Arctic conditions they had never been designed to handle for extended periods. The remaining 2 wolves received updated tactical data from their fallen companions' final moments, but that information only made Jake more dangerous. Now he knew exactly how these machines thought, how they moved, and, most importantly, how they could be killed. The second wolf died when Jake triggered a small avalanche that buried it under tons of snow and ice. The third fell victim to a trap that used the storm's own fury as a weapon, guiding the machine into a wind shear that damaged its stabilization systems beyond repair. By the end of the second day, Jake had accomplished something unprecedented in the simulation's 50-year history. He had not only survived an encounter with the primary predators, he had killed all three of them using nothing but environmental awareness and tactical thinking. The observation deck was chaos. Alien cadets argued about what they had witnessed, while instructors scrambled to understand how a human with no natural advantages had defeated military-grade cybernetic predators in their own environment. Commander Vexitar stared at the tracking, displays showing 3 dead wolves and 1 very much alive human. Every survival theory he had learned suggested that Jake Morrison should have died on the first day. Instead, the human was not just surviving, but actively hunting the hunters. Lisa. Hayes watched her friend's vital signs with growing amazement. Jake's body temperature remained stable. His heart rate showed controlled exertion rather than panic, and his brain activity indicated someone who was thinking clearly despite the impossible conditions. "He's not just surviving," she whispered to Alex Carter, who stood beside her with his mouth hanging open. "He's in control out there." Alex nodded slowly, remembering stories Jake had told about his grandfather's military training. At the time, those tales had seemed like ancient history compared to the advanced technology they studied at the academy. Now Alex was beginning to understand that some forms of knowledge never became obsolete. On the tracking display, Jake's position marker moved with purpose through the storm. He wasn't wandering aimlessly or seeking simple shelter. He was exploring his environment, mapping its features, and preparing for whatever the simulation would throw at him next. The betting. Pools had been closed and refunded. Nobody knew how to calculate odds for something that had never happened before. By the 5th day, Jake had transformed from a struggling survivor into something the alien observers had never seen before. He moved through the Arctic wasteland like he owned it, his footsteps confident even in the worst blizzard conditions. Where other participants had fought desperately against their environment, Jake had learned to dance with it. The observation deck had become a constant gathering place for cadets and instructors from every species. Word of the impossible human had spread throughout Kepler Station, drawing crowds who came to witness something that challenged everything they thought they knew about survival and adaptation. Commander Vexitar studied the tactical displays with growing unease. Jake had established no fewer than 7 different shelter sites across the simulation zone, each one perfectly positioned to take advantage of natural wind patterns and thermal pockets. More disturbing still, he had begun scavenging components from the destroyed cybernetic wolves, fashioning crude but effective tools from their advanced technology. "Sir," reported technical specialist Zara, a multi-armed centaurian whose species prided itself on mechanical aptitude. "The human has somehow managed to jury-rig a working thermal scanner from salvaged predator components. His technical knowledge appears far more advanced than his academy records indicate." Vexitar's scaled brow furrowed as he reviewed Jake's academic file. The human showed average performance in advanced technology courses, consistently ranking in the middle of his class for cybernetics and adaptive systems. Yet somehow, using nothing but basic tools and salvaged parts, he had created functional equipment in sub-zero conditions that would challenge even trained engineers. "It doesn't make sense," muttered Dr. Kelp, the Aquarian physiology expert who had been monitoring Jake's biological responses. "His body should have entered hypothermic shock days ago. Human thermal regulation simply isn't designed for these conditions." Lisa Hayes overheard the comment and moved closer to the monitoring station. As the only human medical specialist observing the simulation, her insights had become increasingly valuable to the confused alien staff. "May I see his vital readings?" she asked politely. Dr. Kelp gestured to the holographic display showing Jake's biological data. Heart rate, body temperature, brain activity, and metabolic function scrolled past in real-time streams of information. Lisa studied the readings with growing amazement. "His body has adapted," she said softly. "Look at these metabolic patterns. He somehow triggered a controlled hypothermic state that maintains consciousness and motor function while reducing overall energy expenditure." "Impossible," Dr. Kelp replied with scientific certainty. "No known species can voluntarily control hypothermic responses with such precision." "Humans can," Lisa said, remembering stories from Earth's military history. Elite Special Forces soldiers have been known to survive in extreme conditions by entering controlled metabolic states. It's not taught at the academy because it's considered too primitive for modern warfare. On the display screens, Jake was moving through a storm that had intensified beyond the simulation's normal parameters. The adaptive AI had begun increasing difficulty levels in response to his continued survival, generating weather conditions that exceeded the original program specifications. Jake seemed completely unbothered by the escalating environmental hostility. If anything, he appeared to be using the increasingly violent storms to his advantage, timing his movements to coincide with the worst weather when any remaining predators would have the most difficulty tracking him. That's when the simulation deployed its apex predator. The cybernetic bear materialized from the storm like a mountain of death and metal. Standing 3 meters tall at the shoulder, its armored frame housed the most advanced learning algorithms the Academy possessed. This machine had killed the last 7 participants in various simulations, including a psychic Altarian who could literally read its programming in real time. Every being in the observation deck fell silent as the massive predator began its hunt. Unlike the wolves, which relied on pack tactics and speed, the cybernetic bear was designed for overwhelming force and unstoppable determination. Its armor could withstand military-grade weapons, its sensors could track prey through any concealment, and its learning algorithms adapted faster than any previous cybernetic predator. Jake detected the bear's approach long before its sensors found him. His jury-rigged thermal scanner, primitive though it was, picked up the massive heat signature moving through the storm. Most participants would have run immediately upon detecting such a threat. Jake did something that defied all logical survival: instincts. He began stalking the apex predator. For 2 full days, Jake shadowed the cybernetic bear through the worst conditions the simulation could generate. He learned its patrol routes, studied its sensor sweeps, and most importantly, identified its behavioral patterns. The machine might possess advanced learning algorithms, but it still followed programmed responses that could be predicted and exploited. Commander Vexitar watched the tracking displays with growing disbelief. The human's movement pattern showed someone who was hunting rather than being hunted. Jake stayed just outside the bear's sensor range, following it like a ghost through the Arctic wasteland. "What is he doing?" demanded Instructor Thane, a Voltaran combat specialist whose crystalline features reflected his agitation. "He should be running from that thing, not following it." Alex Carter found himself answering before he realized he was speaking. "He's learning from it," he said, understanding his friend's tactics better than any alien observer could. "Jake always said that the best way to beat an enemy is to think like them first." On the 7th day, during a storm so violent that the simulation's safety protocols nearly triggered automatic shutdown, Jake implemented a plan that left every observer speechless. He had spent days preparing the battlefield, weakening ice formations, at strategic points and positioning himself to take advantage of the storm's fury. When the cybernetic bear finally detected his thermal signature and began its charge, Jake was ready. The chase led through a narrow canyon that Jake had selected specifically for this encounter. As the massive predator thundered after him, its weight and momentum carrying it forward at incredible speed, Jake triggered the trap he had spent days preparing. Controlled avalanches, precisely timed and positioned, buried the cybernetic bear under tons of ice and rock. The machine's advanced armor protected it from immediate destruction, but its mobility was completely compromised. What happened next shocked every observer into silence. Jake didn't run from the trapped predator. Instead, he began the methodical process of digging it out. Using tools he had crafted from previous kills and salvaged materials, he worked for hours in the howling storm to expose the partially buried machine. "He's lost his mind," whispered a Kithmari cadet, her insectoid features showing confusion and horror. The cold has finally driven him insane, but Lisa Hayes recognized what Jake was really doing. "He's not trying to free it," she breathed, watching her friend work with surgical precision. "He's taking it apart." Jake Morrison, using improvised tools in sub-zero conditions during a storm that should have killed him, began dismantling the most advanced combat AI the Academy possessed. His movements were careful and deliberate, showing an understanding of cybernetic systems that his academic record suggested he shouldn't possess. Component by component, Jake stripped the apex predator of its most valuable parts: the power core, which could provide energy for weeks; the advanced sensor array, which could detect threats at impossible ranges; the central processing unit, which contained learning algorithms worth more than most starships. The alien observers watched in stunned fascination as Jake bundled his salvaged technology and disappeared back into the storm. He had not only defeated the simulation's ultimate challenge, he had turned it into raw materials for his own survival. Commander Vextar found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. According to every military theory he had studied, Jake Morrison should have died on the first day. Instead, the human had somehow made himself the apex predator in an environment designed to kill anything that entered it. On the 8th day, Jake did something that shattered the alien observer's understanding of rational behavior completely. Armed with his improvised weapons and jury-rigged technology, he walked directly into the center of the worst storm the simulation could generate. He wasn't trying to survive anymore. He was hunting for whatever challenge the simulation would throw at him next. The simulation's artificial intelligence had reached a crisis point that its programmers never anticipated. Every conventional predator had failed against the human who refused to follow any predictable pattern. The adaptive algorithms designed to learn from failure and evolve more effective hunting strategies found themselves trapped in recursive loops of confusion. In the central processing core of Kepler Station, quantum computers worked frantically to generate a response to Jake Morrison. The AI analyzed his behavioral patterns, searching for weaknesses to exploit, but found only contradictions that defied logical analysis. The human moved like a predator, but thought like prey. He showed tactical brilliance, followed by seemingly random decisions. He displayed advanced technical knowledge while using primitive survival techniques. The solution the AI produced was unprecedented in the simulation's 50-year history. It would deploy the ultimate adaptive predator, a shape-shifting cybernetic organism that could become any threat Jake had previously encountered. Unlike the fixed-form wolves or bear, this machine could literally evolve in real time to counter any strategy or behavior pattern. Commander Vexatar received the AI's recommendation with growing unease. The shape-shifting predator had never been used in a survival simulation before. It was considered too dangerous, too unpredictable, too likely to cause system-wide failures that could compromise the entire station's safety protocols. "Sir," reported technical specialist Zara, her multiple arms working frantically across control interfaces. "The simulation AI is requesting permission to deploy the adaptive polymorphic hunter. This unit has no safety restrictions and no behavioral limitations." Vextar stared at the authorization request on his display. Activating the shapeshifter meant accepting that Jake Morrison had already achieved something impossible. The simulation was admitting defeat against conventional predators and requesting permission to use experimental technology that might kill the human instantly. "Deploy it," Vextar ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of command responsibility. "But maintain constant monitoring. If the unit shows any signs of system instability, we abort immediately." The shape-shifting predator materialized in the Arctic wasteland as a pool of liquid metal that quickly formed into the sleek lines of a cybernetic wolf. Its surface rippled with adaptive nanotechnology, constantly analyzing environmental data and adjusting its configuration for optimal performance. Jake detected the new threat almost immediately through his jury-rigged sensors. The thermal signature was different from anything he had encountered before, showing energy patterns that shifted and changed as he watched. This wasn't just another predator following programmed behaviors. This was something that could think and adapt as quickly as he could. What Jake did next would have been considered insanity by any military strategist in the galaxy. He began talking to himself. The alien observers watched in horrified fascination as Jake Morrison, alone in the Arctic wasteland, started carrying on animated conversations with voices only he could hear. He sang songs from Earth's ancient cultures, recited poetry in languages that predated interstellar travel, and made tactical decisions that seemed to contradict his previous strategic brilliance. "The isolation has finally broken his mind, Dr. Kelp observed with clinical detachment. Prolonged exposure to extreme conditions and stress has triggered psychological collapse. But Lisa Hayes recognized something different in Jake's behavior. She had studied human psychology as part of her medical training, and what she was witnessing wasn't madness. It was something far more sophisticated and terrifying. "He's making himself unpredictable," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "He knows that machine learns from behavioral patterns, so he's deliberately destroying any patterns it might lock on to." The shape-shifting predator stalked through the storm, its advanced sensors struggling to understand the target it was hunting. Every time it began to develop a tactical response to Jake's behavior, he would shift to completely different actions that invalidated its analysis. The machine's learning algorithms, designed to find patterns and exploit them, found themselves chasing phantoms through an ever-changing maze of human unpredictability. Jake would move with tactical precision for hours, then suddenly start dancing through the snow while singing lullabies his grandmother had taught him decades ago. He would construct elaborate traps using advanced engineering principles, then abandon them to build snowmen that served no apparent strategic purpose. The cybernetic hunter cycled through every predator form it had learned, trying to find an approach that would work against this impossible human. It became a wolf pack, but Jake responded by having philosophical conversations with the wind. It transformed into a bear, but Jake started practicing Earth martial arts forms that had no practical application in Arctic survival. On the 9th day, during a whiteout blizzard that reduced visibility to arm's length, Jake encountered the shapeshifter in direct confrontation. The machine had exhausted its adaptive responses and settled on a configuration that combined elements from every previous predator. creating a nightmare amalgamation of metal and death. Jake looked at the creature that had been designed specifically to kill him, and he laughed. The sound carried through the storm with a quality that made every alien observer shiver. It wasn't the laughter of madness or fear. It was the sound of someone who had just realized that they held all the winning cards in a game their opponent didn't even understand they were playing. Instead of fighting the ultimate predator, Jake did something that broke every military protocol ever written. He stopped moving entirely and began building something in the snow. The shapeshifter approached cautiously, its sensors analyzing Jake's construction project with growing confusion. The human was assembling components he had salvaged from every previous predator kill, combining them with natural materials found in the Arctic environment. The configuration made no immediate sense as either a weapon or a shelter. The alien. Observers debated frantically about what they were witnessing. Commander Vex's tar recognized some of the salvaged components as belonging to the cybernetic bear's sensor array, but their current arrangement defied any logical explanation. It could be a weapon, suggested Instructor Thane, his crystalline, features reflecting uncertainty. Though the power coupling seems insufficient for any significant energy discharge. Perhaps a communication device, offered Dr. Kelp, though what he would hope to communicate with in that environment is unclear. Alex Carter found himself defending his friend once again. Whatever Jake is building, he's been planning it since the first day. Look at the components he's chosen. Every predator he killed, he took specific parts. This isn't random construction. The shape-shifting predator, programmed to attack when its target appeared vulnerable, launched itself at Jake's position. The massive cybernetic organism expected to find him defenseless while focused on his building project. Instead, it triggered a trap that demonstrated human engineering creativity at its most devastating. Jake had constructed a localized electromagnetic pulse generator using salvaged alien technology and principles his grandfather had taught him about electrical systems. The device created a controlled energy burst that fried the shapeshifter's adaptive circuits while simultaneously generating a thermal bloom that masked Jake's escape route. The ultimate predator, designed to be unstoppable and infinitely adaptable, crashed into the snow as a collection of expensive scrap metal. Its shape-shifting capabilities failed as its quantum processors rebooted frantically, trying to restore system functionality in the middle of an Arctic storm. Jake didn't wait for the machine to recover. Using techniques that blended primitive survival skills with advanced technical knowledge, he began the careful process of permanently disabling the most sophisticated weapon the Academy possessed. The final day of the simulation began with conditions so severe that multiple safety protocols activated automatically. The storm had reached intensity levels that exceeded the original program parameters, generating winds that could strip flesh from bone and temperatures that would flash freeze exposed metal. Jake Morrison, who should have been evacuated hours earlier for his own safety, removed his emergency beacon and disabled his location transponder. The only indication that he remained alive somewhere in the white hell was the steady stream of vital signs transmitted through his medical monitoring equipment. In the observation deck, alien faces pressed against reinforced windows, while sophisticated minds struggled to process what they had witnessed. A human with no natural advantages had not only survived the impossible simulation, but had turned it into a demonstration of adaptation that challenged every theory about evolution and survival. Commander Vextar stood before the main display. Screens, watching biosignatures that showed someone operating at peak efficiency in conditions that should have killed most sentient life within minutes. Every military principle he had learned suggested that Jake Morrison should be dead. Instead, the human's vital signs indicated someone who wasn't just surviving, but thriving in the heart of the storm. The 10th day arrived with a storm so violent that the simulation's quantum processors nearly triggered an emergency shutdown. Winds exceeded 300 kilometers per hour. Temperatures dropped below the measurement capabilities of standard. Sensors and electromagnetic interference from the storm itself began affecting the station's primary systems. Jake Morrison, somewhere in the heart of that impossible tempest, had become more than a survival phenomenon. He had evolved into something that challenged every assumption the galactic military community held about adaptation and warfare. His vital signs, transmitted through medical monitors that should have failed hours earlier, showed someone who had transcended the normal limitations of his species. Commander Vextar stood in the observation deck surrounded by the greatest military minds from 12 different civilizations. Generals, admirals, and combat specialists had arrived from across the sector to witness the impossible human who had turned their most lethal simulation into a proving ground for theories they were only beginning to understand. "Sir," reported technical specialist Zara, her multiple arms coordinating data streams from sensors that were struggling to function in the electromagnetic chaos. "We're losing telemetry coherence. The storm is generating interference patterns that exceed our compensation algorithms." Through the static-filled displays, Jake's position appeared as a faint signal drifting through the white hell. His movement patterns showed someone who wasn't merely surviving the ultimate storm, but was actively using its fury for purposes that remained unclear to the observers. Lisa Hayes pressed closer to the medical monitoring station, her trained eye interpreting the biological data that continued to stream from Jake's position. What she saw defied everything she had learned about human physiology during her medical training. "His metabolic rate has stabilized at levels that should be impossible," she reported to the assembled observers. "He somehow achieved a perfect balance between energy conservation and operational effectiveness. His body is functioning like a precision machine optimized for these exact conditions." Dr. Kelp, the Aquarian physiology expert, studied the readings with growing amazement. The thermal regulation patterns suggest he's developed conscious control over normally involuntary biological processes. This level of physiological mastery typically requires decades of training in specialized environments. Alex Carter, watching his best friend's miracle of survival, remembered conversations they had shared during quiet moments at the academy. Jake had often talked about his grandfather's stories, military adventures that seemed primitive compared to their advanced technological education. Now Alex understood that those ancient techniques had been preparation for exactly this moment. Jake always said that the most advanced technology in the galaxy was still just tools, Alex said quietly, speaking to the assembled crowd of alien experts. But humans learned to survive with nothing but their minds and willpower long before we ever reached the stars. The observation deck fell silent as the implications of those words sank in. Every species represented in the room had evolved specialized advantages for their homeworld environments: natural armor, energy manipulation, enhanced sensory capabilities, technological symbiosis. Humans alone had developed as generalists, equipped with nothing but adaptability and the refusal to accept defeat. That's when Jake's signal vanished entirely from the tracking displays. Emergency alarms began sounding. throughout the observation deck as technicians frantically worked to re-establish contact. The storm had reached intensity levels that interfered with even military-grade communication systems, creating a dead zone where conventional sensors could not penetrate. "Initiate emergency extraction protocols," ordered Commander Vextar, his voice tight with the possibility that he had finally witnessed Jake Morrison's death. "Deploy rescue teams to his last known coordinates." "Sir?" interrupted Lisa Hayes, pointing to the medical monitoring display. "His vital signs are still transmitting. Weak signal, but he's alive out there." The biosignatures showed someone who remained conscious and active despite being lost in conditions that would destroy most technology and kill any known form of life within minutes. Jake's heart rate indicated controlled exertion rather than panic. His brain activity showed clear cognitive function, and his body temperature remained within survivable ranges. For 6 hours, the rescue teams searched through the storm without finding any trace of Jake Morrison. The white hell had swallowed him completely, leaving only the faint electronic whisper of his medical monitors to prove he still lived somewhere in the chaos. When the simulation timer finally reached 0, marking the official end of the 10-day challenge, Jake Morrison emerged from the storm like a legend walking out of mythology. The rescue teams found him sheltering in a complex structure that defied easy description. Built from salvaged cybernetic components, natural ice formations, and materials that seemed impossible to obtain in the Arctic environment, his shelter was a masterpiece of engineering that protected him from the worst storm in the simulation's history. But Jake wasn't alone. Beside him stood the reprogrammed remains of the shape-shifting Predator, its adaptive systems now serving as Jake's companion rather than his hunter. Using techniques that blended primitive programming knowledge with salvaged alien technology, Jake had accomplished something that the Academy's top computer scientists considered theoretically impossible. He had turned the simulation's ultimate weapon into his ally. The rescue team leader, a veteran Sauron warrior named Koreth, approached Jake's shelter with weapons ready. Military protocol demanded caution when encountering unknown technology, especially equipment that had been modified by someone operating under extreme stress conditions. "Cadet Morrison," Koreth called through his suit's communication system. "Are you in need of immediate medical assistance?" Jake emerged from his shelter wearing clothes he had crafted from salvaged materials and carrying tools that represented a fusion of human ingenuity and alien technology. His face showed the effects of 10 days in hell, but his eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had faced the impossible and won. "I'm fine, Sergeant," Jake replied, his voice steady despite everything he had endured. The simulation was educational. The understatement sent waves of disbelief through the rescue team. Educational. Jake Morrison had just described the galaxy's most lethal survival challenge, the simulation that had killed every previous participant, as educational. When they returned to Kepler Station, Commander Vextar waited in the docking bay with the entire Academy population gathered to witness history. As Jake stepped off the rescue shuttle, still wearing his improvised survival gear and accompanied by his reprogrammed cybernetic companion, the alien crowd fell silent with something approaching religious awe. "Cadet Morrison," Vextar said formally, his reptilian features showing emotions that had no names in his species' vocabulary. "You have accomplished something unprecedented in the 50-year history of the Arctic hunting simulation." Jake nodded politely, seeming remarkably unimpressed by his own achievement. "Thank you, sir. When can I attempt the next simulation level?" The question sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Jake Morrison had not only survived what everyone considered certain death, He was asking for more challenges. Lisa Hayes stepped forward from the crowd, her medical bag ready to treat the injuries he must have sustained. "Jake," she said with concern filling her voice, "you need medical evaluation and recovery time. What you just accomplished should be impossible for any human." Jake looked at his friend with genuine confusion. "Why would it be impossible? I just used what my grandfather taught me, combined with some basic engineering principles we learned in first-year classes." The simplicity of his explanation highlighted something profound that the alien observers were only beginning to understand. Jake Morrison hadn't survived the Arctic hunting simulation through superior evolution or advanced technology. He had succeeded through pure human adaptability and the absolute refusal to accept that any problem couldn't be solved. Commander Vextar made a decision that would change military training throughout the galactic community. "The Arctic hunting simulation is hereby retired from active use," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Not because it has become too dangerous, but because one human has proven that what we considered an impossible challenge was actually a solvable problem." The alien faces in the crowd showed a mixture of admiration and fear as they contemplated the implications. If humans could solve the unsolvable using nothing but determination and creativity, what other impossible challenges might they turn into routine exercises? Jake Morrison, standing in the docking bay surrounded by the greatest military minds in the galaxy, grinned at his friends Alex and Lisa. "So," he said with casual enthusiasm, "what's the next simulation we can try? I've got 3 different ideas for improving my approach to Arctic survival, and I'd like to test them as soon as possible." The human factor, the aliens realized, wasn't just about surviving the impossible. It was about making the impossible look easy and then asking for bigger challenges. In a galaxy full of species that had evolved,